right. Thank you, Christine. Appreciate the update. President Obama hitting the road to talk about his newly released budget proposal. He spoke to students at a community college in Virginia, trying to sell the plan directly to voters. Here's what he said.
I'm proposing some difficult cuts that, frankly, I wouldn't normally make if they weren't absolutely necessary, but they are.
The plan includes tax hikes on the wealthiest Americans and targeted investments, including $476 billion for infrastructure upgrades over 6 years, $350 billion for job creation, $30 billion to hire teachers and police and firefighters, $30 billion to modernize schools, and $2.2 billion on R&D for advanced manufacturing. Talking about the budget with me this morning is Republican Senator Pat Toomey of the great state of Pennsylvania. He also serves on the Joint Economic and Budget Committees and served on the Debt Super Committee. It's nice to have you, sir. Thanks for talking with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You've said about the president's budget, it doesn't go after the deficit. It doesn't go after entitlements. So let's talk about both of those things. First, entitlements. What entitlements would you cut?
Well, let's look at what the president himself has said. He has said that the long-term driver of our deficits and our debt, our completely unsustainable budget picture, is mandatory health care spending. It's the big health care programs. The president knows that. And yet he gives us a budget in which spending grows, taxes are higher, it spends even more than the tax increases, and gives us a bigger deficit than we had last year, and no reforms at all on the fundamental driver of these programs. So I think that's a tremendous abdication of leadership. What we need to do is restructure the design of the big health care programs, Medicare and Medicaid, for younger workers, so that when they retire, it'll be there for them. We're on a path right now where it will not survive.
Okay, so then let's take a look at your plan for cutting the budget. Here's there's been an analysis, and I know you know this, at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. It's a bipartisan organization. Here's what you propose: tax cuts for the wealthy. For people who are making under $200,000, taxes would rise. You would limit the child credit. You would limit more.
Well, wait a minute. I got to stop that because that's factually ridiculous.
Really?
I've never
okay.
called, factually wrong and ridiculous.
What part
and not
of that?
Close.
Okay. Well, let's start.
Raising taxes on people whose income is lower than $200,000. What I've said is we should make the current tax rates permanent. In fact, what I prefer to do, that's at a minimum, would be something like what I proposed in the Super Committee, which was a process by which we would simplify the tax code, get rid of some of the deductions and loopholes and credits, broaden the base on which we apply taxes, but do it with lower rates for everybody.
So some of those loopholes and credits, though, would be, for example, the mortgage interest deduction. You want to get rid of that or limit that, right?
Well,
and the child credit?
They might be. Here's my suggestion. Marty Feldstein, a Harvard economist, has come up with a very, very creative and I think an elegant way to deal with the fact that we have all these huge deductions that force us to have high marginal rates. And what his suggestion is, put all of the itemized deductions into a basket and then limit the total value of that basket. It doesn't mean you have to eliminate any one of those items, but you couldn't have all of them. So now, the advantage of that is then you could lower marginal rates accordingly.
But there are people who look at what you have proposed, and let's focus on the two that we're not arguing over, the child credit and also the mortgage interest deduction. And you have said earlier, Medicaid and Medicare, right, all of those. And there are people who look at that, which is what you're proposing, and say, so that's bad for the middle class. Those are all deductions that middle class people rely on and wealthy people don't really rely on.
Let's remember, the middle class also pays a marginal tax rate on their income. And what I have said is if we diminish the value of deductions, I want to lower that rate as well. So the middle class would be paying a lower marginal rate. As far as Medicare goes, I mean, the president has acknowledged it's not sustainable in its current form. So I'm not talking about pulling the rug out from under anybody who's on Medicare now or about to go on Medicare, but somebody my age who's 50 years old or someone in their 40s, I think we've got to make some changes. I think wealthy people are going to have to pay more, frankly, for this benefit. I just don't think it makes sense to continue this universal entitlement that's growing faster than our economy can possibly grow.
Let me ask you about the Super Committee. When you served on the Super Committee and it failed to reach an agreement, you said, this is a quote, "The president actively made our job more difficult." The president, in turn, said about Republicans, Republicans refused to listen to the voices of reason. That's a quote there. So as a you know, I'm just a voter, right? I'm just a regular old voter, and I look at those congressional approval numbers, and I think, wow, these people just cannot get anything done. Even in the most important issue, the Super Committee cannot get something done. How do you fix that?
You know, it's very, very frustrating. You know, what I tried to do was offer a proposal that was outside of my comfort zone, something that met the demands of the other side. I offered tax reform that generated new revenue. They said they had to have revenue. I said, okay, we really need to change the architecture of the big entitlement programs, but since you guys aren't willing to do it, can you at least agree on some of the very minor tweaks along the edges that'll save some money? That was a proposal that actually got some initial traction, but then, frankly, the most liberal wing of the Democratic Party rebelled against it, and we weren't able to make
so it sounds like you're saying it sounds like you're saying there's just no hope because it becomes a political thing. It's not even really about trying to trim the budget. It's really about, listen, we're not going to let you do what you want to do. We're going to, because we know you're not going to let us do what we want to do, so we're all going to have a giant stalemate, and too bad for the voters.
Except that, again, I was the one that offered some of what the Democrats wanted to do in order to try to reach an agreement, and they weren't willing to meet us halfway, so that makes it pretty hard to get a deal done. I think ultimately it takes presidential leadership, and unfortunately in this budget we're not seeing it.
Interesting. All right, Senator Pat Toomey joining us this morning. Thank you, sir, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Still ahead this morning.